Lesson 1, Unit 2. Defining the project scope. Project scope is the total amount of work that needs to be done to complete a project. The project scope should be identified in a detailed description listing all major deliverables and project boundaries. The project scope needs to include sufficient information for the project team and partners to produce the desired deliverables, on time and within budget. In general, the project scope is determined early in the project management process. It is documented and agreed by all project stakeholders. This information is captured in the project scope statement. This is an important document to avoid project scope creep. The scope statement is the project management document that describes the scope of a project. The main purpose of this document is to get a common understanding of the project scope among all key project stakeholders. This document is used as a communication tool to ensure that everyone has a common perception of what the project is and what it is not. It is also used to communicate any changes made to the project. A typical project scope statement will include the following information: a brief description of the project objectives and principal outcomes, a project justification that describes the need that the project will satisfy or the problem it will address, and a scope description, which is a high-level list of what is within the scope and what is out of scope of the project. This list includes all the major deliverables the project will create to achieve the project objective. The project acceptance criteria includes performance requirements and essential conditions to complete the work, which must be met before project deliverables are accepted by the beneficiaries and the donor. Additional information includes the project constraints, which are the limitations imposed by either the donor, the beneficiaries, or the local government. Project assumptions, which is a list of the necessary conditions that will make the project a success. Project dependencies, which are either internal or external factors in which the project is dependent on. Project success criteria. Success is ultimately defined by the beneficiaries, so it's a good practice to ask and document what the beneficiaries expect from the project. Once the major deliverables of the project have been identified, the next step is to break down the scope of work into more manageable tasks. This list is used to determine the resource requirements such as the schedule, people, and final budget estimates. The work breakdown structure is a technique in project management that facilitates the decomposition of the total scope of work into a hierarchical structure and is a key project deliverable that organizes the team's work into manageable sections. The WBS is a vertical breakdown, moving from the project goal to the activity level. This decomposition process allows a good level of confidence in estimating the final project schedule and budget. It also shows all the work that needs to be accomplished. The chart below shows 4 levels in the WBS, from project goal to outcomes, outputs, and activities. The first 2 levels of the WES define a set of planned objectives or outcomes that collectively and exclusively represent 100% of the project scope. At each subsequent level, the children of a parent node collectively and exclusively represent 100% of the scope of their parent node. The lowest level of the WES represents the activities. Developing the WES is a participative process. You will need to include team members, some key stakeholders, and people in the organization that have worked in a similar project. The information you will need includes the project proposal and the logical framework matrix. To develop a WES, you will need to organize a meeting and distribute all relevant information to the participants. A participative process ensures the WBS will be complete and helps key stakeholders understand the scope of the project. In the session, you will explain the purpose and some basic rules to help guide the work. A good practice is to use a large whiteboard and colored pieces of paper where participants can write activities and place them in their respective levels. For example, the use of sticky notes can facilitate the movement of the components of the WBS until a final structure is completed and all participants can agree with. The final WBS can then be transferred to an electronic document or a software application where it will be used to develop the project schedule and the detailed budget. One of the main rules in developing the WBS is called the 100% rule, and it states that the WBS includes 100% of the work defined by the project scope and captures all deliverables, internal, external, interim, in terms of the work to be completed, including project management and administrative activities. That means that the WBS will include all other work not described in the logrum, such as project team meetings and trainings, participation in seminars, presentations, administrative activities, setting up the project office structure, the purchase of project equipment, and including the development of our project management information systems. All the activities that will use project resources need to be included in the WBS. Another important rule of the WBS is the 880 rule. This rule states that the duration of any activity should not take more than 80 hours, nor less than 8 hours to finish. The purpose of this rule is to keep the size and detail of the WBS at a manageable level. Adding tasks that are less than 8 hours can increase the time and effort to manage the project scope. Adding activities that are more than 80 hours long can hide important details in the activity that can create risk to the project if they are not properly monitored. If an activity is greater than 80 hours, then you need to decompose it further into lower level work packages. A good practice in developing a WBS is to include a numbering system to identify each element of the WBS. This numbering system is useful for developing and tracking the project schedule and the project budget. Each element of the WBS will have an identifying code that will indicate the activity, output, and outcome it belongs to. When developing a WBS, there are some best practices that you need to follow. This is a list of the key characteristics a good WBS should have. Deliverable-oriented. A well-designed WBS represents the work in terms of planned outcomes instead of planned actions. Hierarchical structure. The WBS follows the levels of the logical framework. It breaks down all the work under the project goal, outcomes, and outputs. It is not a structure that is organized by phases or cycles. Must contain 100% of the project work. A good WBS needs to include every single aspect of the work defined by the project scope. It cannot have duplicate elements. An activity should appear in only one place in the WBS. Additional characteristics include that the breakdown of the WBS until you can estimate with high certainty the cost of the task or activity. It has a numbering system. Each WBS has an identification number assigned to it. It is participatory. Developing the WBS is not the job of one person. And then the final characteristic is that it needs to be flexible. The WBS should accommodate for changes.